Thank you for joining us for our April Family Support webinar, Extended School Year. It's not just summer school with Dr. Destiny Pacha. My name is Stacy Ward. I am the CEO for PWSA USA. And a little bit of information about Dr. Pacha. I'm so excited she's joined us. Dr. Pacha has over 20 years of experience in the education field. She's held many, many roles, including a general education teacher, special education teacher, behavior specialist, which might be my favorite, inclusion facilitator, exceptional student, education specialist, and some others. She's also the founder and president of Empowered Education Solutions, an organization supporting families and children with varying exceptionalities and unique abilities nationwide. Dr. Pacha has also recently published the first and only children's book about PWS. It starts with Hello, Katie's Story, and it's a book about Prader-Willi Syndrome, and it's to help children embrace their differences while also exploring their similarities. Welcome, Dr. Pacha. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Stacy, for the wonderful introduction. I want to also take a moment to thank PWSA USA for inviting me this evening. As Stacy said, I have held many roles in the public school system over the past several decades, one of which was also the administrator during extended school year. Tonight, I'm going to be going over what exactly is ESY, because ESY is not just summer school. We have a few objectives for tonight. One is to give you guys an overview of what extended school year is, what it looks like, the eligibility determination and questions that the team should be asking. And then if it is decided that your child does need extended school year, how to secure those services on your child's IEP. So if ESY isn't summer school, what is it? I thought this chart kind of gives you a good overview of just kind of comparing what ESY offers or has and what summer school offers and has. First and foremost, extended school year is only for students who have an individual education plan. Summer school can also have students that have IEPs. However, it is not a requirement to participate in summer school, where ESY, you must have an IEP. This is because ESY is under the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or IDEA, and is part of determining whether ESY is necessary to provide your child FAPE, or free and appropriate public education. So then what about students without IEPs? They are not able to participate in ESY, but of course they are able to participate in summer school if that is something that is offered within your school district or within your state. So with the idea that ESY is only for students with IEPs, they do focus on your child's individualized goals. That means that the goals that are on your child's IEP will continue, not necessarily all of them, but maybe some focused goals or goals that have shown some regression throughout the year. Whereas summer school might have overarching goals of maybe continuing with reading or making some reading gains. It is not individualized to your child. The goal would be for all the students that are participating. Specialized instruction is part of the services provided on a student's IEP. So they are also provided during ESY and not necessarily during summer school. Summer school can be taught by a teacher, whereas ESY is taught by teachers that are certified or trained or have a special education background. So then I'm often asked, is ESY or is summer school even, can that determine retention? ESY is not intended to determine whether your child is going to progress to the next school year. That should have already been determined. ESY is only for the factor that your child needs to continue the education when school is not in session. Now, summer school can sometimes. It depends on your district's policy. Some will have states that have the mandatory retention year. Typically, across the country, that tends to be around a third, fourth grade level. And if you are not passing the state test, then they may offer some sort of summer school or a credit recovery of some sort over summer to then decide if afterwards, if the child is going to be moved to the next grade level. So what about those related services that are on your child's IEP? Related services typically consist of speech, language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. During ESY, those services can be continued if determined necessary. And with summer school, what is interesting is that it can also include related services if your school is going to provide some sort of combination. Let's say your child doesn't need the services for academics, but they do need speech therapy to continue during the summer. Your child might then qualify for summer school or some sort of summer program at the school, but then also receive speech therapy during that time while on campus. So let's look again. What exactly is ESY? ESY are services that should be individualized based on your child's needs and on the IEP. It is specialized instruction for your child to continue those goals that are on the IEP. And again, it can include related services and therapies, PT, OT, speech. And it also will include supplemental aids and services as determined necessary. So that could be continuing or incorporating transportation for your child to be able to access the extended school year campus. It may also be other plans that your child has outlined on the IEP. That could be a behavior intervention plan. That could be an individualized healthcare plan. But obviously the question is cost. Because ESY is covered under IDEA and necessary to provide your child a free and appropriate public education, it is at no cost to you. So who makes that decision about eligibility? How does your child become eligible for ESY? Eligibility is based on each child's individual needs, and criteria for that can differ by state and even district. So it's important that you understand what it is that is the criteria within your district. The IEP team is what and who determines whether your child needs ESY. It is not based on one individual's decision or on one teacher's decision on whether your child needs it. It also is not based on your child's special education program. And what I mean by that is when a child is determined eligible under IDEA, a program is placed on that on the IEP that your child was eligible for. So typically for children with Prader-Willi syndrome, that would fall under the other health impaired program. However, children with PWS can also and often are also found eligible under the autism program. So there are 13 programs that are identified under IDEA. So when I say program, that's what I'm referring to. So let's say you have another child with an IEP that only is for a specific learning disability, maybe in reading, whereas your child with Prader-Willi syndrome has an IEP for other health impaired. They can't be decided whether one child gets ESY just because of the program. So just because your child only has speech as a program or specific learning disabilities as a program, that does not prevent them from being able to access extended school year if determined necessary. The discussion about ESY should be addressed at every IEP meeting. So whether it's an IEP annual review, an IEP that the team is meeting to review reevaluation and reviewing the IEP at the same time, that does not mean that in every meeting the decision has to be made, but it does need to be addressed. And that can be addressed by also deferring that decision. So let's say your child's annual IEP is due in August or September at the beginning of the school year. The team may say they don't have enough data to determine whether your child requires ESY at that time in the year. So then it should be placed in the notes that the team is deferring that decision until enough data is collected. And please understand that is rather common to defer that. However, I often say that there is data because since it is, and it might be an annual review, you have the year prior data to also review to help the team make decisions on whether ESY might be necessary this year. But don't feel, that the team is against it if they ask to defer it. They're just going to wait until further in the year when they have the data over some breaks in the school year to make that decision. Obviously, that is why this presentation and webinar is important right now, because those meetings are often being held now throughout to the end of the school year on reviewing the need for ESY. Also, just because your child has an IEP, ESY is not a guarantee. And it's also important to understand that it is also not appropriate for every child. Obviously, we all think that a break in the school year can be detrimental to our child, and it really obviously can be detrimental to any child, whether they have an IEP or not. But the idea of ESY is that the child is needing it to avoid any sort of regression, or maybe a break will cause, the child to regress to the point that recoupment takes a while. And we'll be discussing those in just a moment. So what are those considerations? The IEP team should consider the following when determining the need for ESY. And remember, this can differ by state and district, but these are some of the most common ones that states and districts outline in their policies. First and foremost, you will hear regression. What is exactly regression? Regression is the idea that when your child is not in school for a length of time, that when they come back to school, there is a significant regression or a significant setback in the progress that they were making. So, do we expect regression out of every child? Sure, there is some thought that, as a child, especially during maybe the summer months, will regress in some of their learning. But then the question is, how long does it take them to get back on track or back where they were? And that's the next one, for a recoupment or relearning. How long does it take your child to get back to where they were? So for example, and this is a very, simplistic example. If before a break, your child knew 12 letters of the alphabet, and they come back from Thanksgiving break and they only know 2 letters of the alphabet, that's obviously quite a regression. But let's say by the end of the week with regular instruction and their services, that they're back up where they were, then that didn't really take that long to relearn. For being gone for multiple months, it only maybe took a week to relearn. So that also needs to be taken into consideration. Some regression is expected, but how long then does it take for them to relearn those skills? And then another one that is often discussed and not always necessarily understood is critical life skills. So the maintenance of critical life skills and what those are needs to be taken into consideration by the team. So a common, definition of a critical skill is a critical skill is a behavioral, academic, social, or other skill that a student's IEP team determines is critical to allowing the student to function independently. Some examples include communicating, dressing, feeding, toileting, and other self-help skills, as well as skills related to social emotional learning and mobility. So although these skills may not be critical to a student's academic progress, they are important in reducing the dependency and allowing that child to have more independence in their life and within their academic setting. Some other factors that a team may want to consider. Degree of progress. How much is the child progressing through the year? And is that going to be halted by a break in instruction and learning? Emerging skills. So emerging skills are those skills that are very early on and that are necessary for continued and future learning. And that also can be thought of as, as they're in these emerging skills, is there a breakthrough opportunity? And this is a really hard one to define and often one that's difficult for a team to consider. These breakthrough opportunities are considered like those aha moments. Like, is your child right on the brink of really making that breakthrough or aha in their learning? If so, then we don't necessarily want to have a quick ending to that opportunity for your child to make that continued progress in that moment. Interfering behaviors. So obviously, for a child with Prader-Willi syndrome, there can be some behaviors that can interfere in their learning. So if those behaviors might exacerbate after a break, which we all know is very common because of that change, or, getting out of school and then back in school, and you might have, a new environment and new teachers. Again, those behaviors might be expected as a little spike, but then are they able to get back on track within a reasonable amount of time? And then some other things that teams might look at is the nature or severity of the disability. So, is a child's disability at a level that, they need to continue to have that constant instruction or therapies? And then there are always special circumstances, and this isn't really something that can be defined. An IEP team can determine that your child, due to some sort of special circumstance, does require an extended school year. So all of those factors, when you are considering them, you need to be looking at data, actual data. Let's see where the child was prior to a break, where they were after the break, and then after a reasonable amount of time, where are they at? So when looking at that, I often can sit in IEP team meetings with families, and teachers will kind of just use that regression idea, right? Of, well, we haven't really seen regression in your child during breaks. That's fair for a teacher to say. However, you have the right to then say, okay, can you show me the data for that? That really should look like a data point on the IEP goals right before a break, and then another point when they return from break, and then obviously another point maybe a week or so later. Data should be collected ongoing. Obviously, you might get a progress report typically every quarter. On that progress report, it will indicate whether your child is making adequate progress, is making progress, is not making progress. And, based on what that is, you may need to call another IEP team meeting to look at the goals. So the data is important. Do I sit in meetings where, a lot of times it's the feelings of the teacher, or, they say they don't really see a regression, or, the child is able to regain those skills rather quickly? We need the data. So what if you ask for it and it's not there? This happens more often than not. And this is when the team then must kind of guess, make a prediction on what they expect the child if the child will regress over a break. So these are some questions that if there isn't data, maybe the team needs to consider. So has the student had difficulty retaining skills over break? This is kind of when the teacher or the therapist might just have to kind of give an overall, idea of whether that has been difficult. Then this is an important one for children with Prader-Willi syndrome, because does the student have known challenges with working memory? For children with Prader-Willi syndrome, yes. Working memory is often a deficit for children with PWS. So if that need for continual repetition of skills and continual repetition of therapy is necessary to maintain those skills, and that is something also to take into consideration. And does the student need continual reinforcement to keep skills during the school year? For children with Prader-Willi syndrome, I would typically say yes. Obviously, they do need that continual reinforcement, but is it at the level that then requires that extension of the school year? So I've kind of been careful on not really saying ESY and summer, although again, that is often the most common time that ESY is offered. ESY really is just intended to be provided when school is not in session. There is an exception there, and I'll touch on that in a moment. So obviously our largest break in the school year is that summer time, unless your school is on some sort of year-long school where you might have shorter breaks throughout the year. Most school districts are on the idea of a summer break being typically 2.5 months. But ESY doesn't have to only be during summer. It can also be during other extended breaks. So these common extended breaks would be your Thanksgiving break, your winter break, which is usually a little longer to include the new year, and then you have spring break. So those are really your three main breaks in school that are for multiple days. But it can also be considered just if it's a long weekend or a 4-day weekend even, where was the child when they came back to school? Also, the question of when is also timing, right? So ESY services can be offered as, kind of a full day or as close to a full day of a school. So it might not be all 6 or 7 hours. It might be 9 to 2. And then services are provided throughout that day. And it also could be, anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week. But we also need to remember, as mentioned previously, if your child only needs a related service or only needs a specific service that's on the IEP, then they may not need to go all day. There might just need to be a schedule of a specific day and time that your child attends and receives those services. So I do want to touch briefly on the ESY where I have except for compensatory services. So during COVID and after COVID, this became a really big factor in determining what services are going to be needed because of that break. And really schools nor anybody in the country or the world were prepared for COVID. So there weren't really contingency plans that are now in place. And many districts are including contingency plans for if school does have to close ever again. So some services that are offered during extended school year time, what if they can't find a therapist? What if, they are unable to hire somebody to provide this specific service during that time? And sadly, that is becoming rather common across the country. We are in dire need of special education teachers, of paraprofessionals, and of therapy providers in the school system. So if your child was determined that they do require extended school year, but the school district could not find someone to fill that position, then your child may be eligible for the compensatory services of extended school year, which then may fall over and go into the school year. So that is kind of a little nuance without going too much into that. This is one of my favorite examples of an actual cut. I did a screenshot of an IEP in a state that does kind of give parents a little bit more of a roadmap of what is available. Often I think when families sit in meetings, ESY is sometimes just brushed over, or it is considered like, a cookie cutter. Your child either fits in what ESY is available or they don't. And that's not the end all be all. We always hear that, square peg in the round hole. That's not what an IEP or ESY should be. It should be tailored to your child. So I loved that this IEP really did list some different options that are available for ESY, including when they're offered. So if you look at that part where the arrow is pointing, it says reference the ESY, reflect on the services page, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But what is it that the child is needing? So they have 2 sections. School year ESY, which would be that time where it is within maybe the Thanksgiving break or the winter break. And then they have summer ESY. So you'll notice that they offer at-home activities. So this could be where the school, your child's special ed teacher provides you some activities that can be done at home that are specialized towards your child's IEP that can then be completed at home. This could even be online programs. A lot of schools now are continuing their use of programs that they may have purchased, iReady, iExcel, things like that are online, where your teacher, your child's special ed teacher may go in and prescribe certain lessons that would be pushed out to your child based on their IEP. So they are still specialized, but then can be worked on at home. Then there's, as we've discussed, just the related services. Maybe your child only needs certain services during ESY. And then you have your uniquely designed program of instruction. So that is your specialized instruction. That might be in some academic areas, that might be some social skills that your child would need to continue during times of break in the school year. And then they have the same ones over on for the summer ESY. They add direct services, which would also likely be when it's more of the full day that your child is going to ESY to continue to somewhat mirror a regular school year. So now your team has decided your child needs ESY. Now what? So if that decision is made during a regular annual review, so let's say, unlike earlier when I was discussing that your IEP might be, that your child's IEP might be due at the beginning of the school year, what if your child's IEP is due in April or May? So you're just coming into a regular annual review. By then, there should be enough data from that school year to review and make that decision. And if the team at that meeting makes the decision, then they just make sure that it's documented on the IEP in the extended school year section. They do need to make sure that they outline the services as they would for any of your child's other services during the school year. So it should be specific to what it is, where it's going to take place, how often it's going to take place, the frequency, and the duration for how long is that going to be. So all of that also needs to be defined in your child's ESY service section. Now, what if that decision can't be made? Maybe, your child, like we've said, is the IEP is due at the beginning of the school year and the team doesn't feel they have enough data. I often say we do have data, right? We have last year's data because it's an annual review. We were reviewing the year prior to determine the needs for this upcoming year. But again, many teams want to use that IEP or maybe those specific goals to collect data on, and that's fair. That is fine. Again, make sure that it's noted that at the beginning they're deferring it and you're going to come back together as a team to review your child's progress over the school year to decide. If that's the case, then a new IEP doesn't need to be written if you're still within your annual review timeframe. So you guys may come to the table and just decide to amend the IEP. So everything else stays the same on your child's IEP. You are just amending to add extended school year services. You may also come back to the table and decide that ESY is not needed, and that just needs to be noted that the team did have the discussion, they did review the data, and the team determined that ESY is not necessary. Something that I think is really important for parents to understand is that we all want or think that our child should and does need that ongoing continuous education and therapies to make progress. However, we need to remember that the question is whether ESY is necessary to avoid a disproportionate harm to the student's IEP and critical life skills. Okay, so it's not just, yes, it would be great, they do need to continue. It's really whether that is going to be so detrimental to your child's progress in academics and their social emotional in their behavior. So again, for ESY, there's a little bit of a difference in what is expected as an outcome for your child. So during the school year, we are looking for progress, right? There is progress that needs to be being made. If progress is not being made, then the IEP team needs to come back together and either review the services, review the goals. Were they appropriate goals? Were they maybe, too lofty based on the baseline data? And we need to revisit that. ESY is a little different. ESY services only need to be provided to maintain the skills, because during the school year, that's when progress is being made. ESY is not necessarily to continue to provide things to make that progress. It's more to maintain so that when the school year starts again, then they're going to go back to really making progress. Again, ESY is just an extension to not regress or to prevent that extended time that it takes for your child to relearn those skills. Again, this is one of those things where, yes, of course, I want students to continue to receive the amazing instruction and services and therapies that they are getting during the school year, because of course, we think those big breaks are going to be detrimental, right? However, there is a downside to ESY, and I do think it's important for families to make that decision based on their children, their families, and their needs. So this can be often very difficult, and I know I'm getting a lot of emails right now. ESY although is required for school districts to offer under IDEA. They are not required to offer it in the same location with the same people at the same time. Okay, so what can that look like for your child? In reality, you see the word on there a lot, very different. Your child may be routed to a different school where they're hosting ESY. This is for various reasons. First of all, obviously, not as many children are going to be going to ESY as they are having to educate during this regular school year, especially since it's only for students with an IEP. So they may route them to, a host school, and that may be closer to you, that may be farther away. It's different times. So your child's schedule, although, they're still going to be going to school possibly for part of the summer or other breaks, it's not going to be at the same time. Your child may go to school from 8 to 3:30, and during the summer, it might be 9 to 2. Okay, so that can be obviously a big change in schedule. Different teachers. Of course, we want our child to be with their teacher who they've made that connection with, which we know is so important for children with PWS. But often those teachers need a break too, and they deserve that break. So there are possibly teachers that might be okay, or they might come in from a different area of special ed. So maybe they're not a teacher that provides services in a separate setting, or they might be a teacher that provides it more on a resource push and pull out, and they want to continue to provide instruction during the summer. Different peers. This is a really big one. It's likely that your child's friends are not going to be in there, especially if their friends are friends from their general ed class that they might be going into, or that might be their regular class, because if they don't have an IEP, ESY is not offered for them. So they might be going into a classroom with completely different friends and peers. Again, similar to different teachers, you're going to have different therapists. Often districts don't need to employ all of their speech therapists over the summer. So they might only have a few that might rotate through the host schools. So again, it's very unlikely that your child is going to have the same speech therapist or occupational therapist during ESY times. And then really important is it's a different nurse, right? So we know how complex our children are that have Prader-Willi syndrome, and the complex healthcare plans that are written and in place during the school year. So now you have a nurse who may not be familiar with PWS at all, may not have ever had experience with PWS. So now that nurse is going to have to familiarize themselves with your child's individual healthcare plan, familiarize themselves with your child and your child's needs, but also make sure to be able to provide training to the staff that is now there during ESY. Again, if they have never met your child, it's likely they have never had a child with Prader-Willi syndrome. So all of that also has to be taken into consideration and planned for. Often teachers, therapists, and nurses, they get 1 day of pre-planning. And that's it. So in that time frame, that is such a critical time because they're expected to plan for the entire duration of extended school year, which although might only be a week sometimes during the school year, but if it's an entire month or 2 months during the summer, they get that 1 day to do it. And in that 1 day, we also have to take time to try to figure out how are we going to make sure that they have the proper training and knowledge about Prader-Willi syndrome. So all of that has to be taken into consideration by the family and by the school team. Although the child might, show the need for it, you also have to look at those downsides or those negatives that could then affect your child. We know how difficult change is for children with Prader-Willi syndrome. So all of these changes might end up being more of a negative than a positive of them going. But that's not to say for all of them. Okay, and this is where really you know your child best. You are your child's biggest advocate. And if you don't feel that going to ESY at another campus is appropriate, then that's a choice that you have. And the school team may, and the family, the IEP team may decide that yes, it would be appropriate, but maybe it's just not appropriate for your child to go. So it should still be put on the IEP that it was the recommendation of the team or that your child meets eligibility for extended school year, but that you have decided as a family not to send your child. All right, that is the end of my presentation. Again, I want to thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you to all of those that will receive the recording after. If you have any questions about extended school year or really anything, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is there. I also encourage you to follow me and Empowered Solutions on Instagram and Facebook. I post frequently on special education needs, new things that have come out of legislation, any information about other parts of an IEP or services. I also love getting questions that then I can share, because if you have the question, I am sure other families have the questions. So I sometimes will post a Q&A of questions that families have asked, and I can give a quick brief description or answer to that question. And then I love to give a more detailed answer to that for other families and for you. And then that can be shared.
So I actually have a couple questions, but for those of you who are here, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. Oh, well, actually, we'll start. We have one. So I noticed the social aspect was not mentioned. Can you explain why or why not?
The social aspect of, I guess I might need a little clarification. Is it the social aspect of being with peers during the summer, or being with Charles? Oh,
Question.
hi, Charles.
Let's see.
I'm wondering if
Charles, you can add it into the chat if you'd like.
I mean, I can take a stab at it now, and then Charles, if it's not what you're specifically, so that's a tough one, because really school is there for educating your child, and then the IEP is there to find those areas that the IEP team needs to target. Although there might be some social goals, absolutely. Determining how it is looked at, I would say, is where it gets difficult, because it's not just it's not like I want my child to be around friends all year long. But if they have a goal that is specific in the social domain that they may have shown regression on, then that could be something that's targeted towards, that target goal for the ESY time. But I think we always need to go back if it's a goal. So it does need to be something that's on the child's IEP that's going to be continued. You don't write new goals for ESY because it is an extension of the school year. That's truly the idea, is that you are taking the school year and extending it during those times that the other children might be on break. So I guess, Charles, if there's a goal that is specific that needs to be targeted, then yes, that can be. But it would not be kind of like the main factor of deciding if a child is eligible for it. And it wouldn't be something that if it's not already a goal, you're not going to make it up just for ESY, if that makes sense.
Thank you. So I actually had a quick question. So first of all, I loved that breakout that you shared from the IEP. I've never seen that in an IEP before.
I mean, you know me, I save all kinds of snippets. I have good examples and I have bad examples of everything from IEPs to health plans. But that one, when I saw that, I was like, oh my goodness, it was really nice that it kind of takes down the, I don't know, like the hidden wall of what is ESY and what am I allowed to have and what does my child deserve to have, or because I sit in these meetings constantly, and it's often just well, we haven't seen any regression, okay, well, that's a very blanket statement. And then also it's, well, I don't know if your child will fit into that group. And that's also not the intention of ESY. It is not supposed to be this secret little group or a group of only extremely what would be considered, I guess, the terms are not the best, but high needs. That's not what this is. It's really meant to be tailored to each child. So if that room is not right for your child, but your child needs the services, then the school needs to find a place. What is that place then? Don't tell me it's because the other kids in that room are not whatever. That one is one that always gets me. It's definitely difficult to hear. And again, it really should go back to data and needs.
Yes. So what I hear happen or see happen in a lot of these meetings is the school will determine either their interpretation of the data, or the data truly shows that somebody doesn't necessarily meet the criteria for ESY. What should parents then do over the summer and then at the beginning of the year to show that regression that in a lot of cases did occur over the summer, to help them going into the meetings the following year to hopefully get a
Absolutely.
different outcome?
Absolutely. So I am all about documentation. You know that. So I keep extreme files on, any families that I help and support. So for me as a parent, you're going to want to do that too. If you notice that your child is getting, whether it's on the daily communication sheet right after a break, and you're like, oh, look at that. There, it's filled up with, areas of need, then keep that, take a picture of it, scan it into your computer. I would be, checking on progress reports, seeing, okay, well, typically progress reports come out around break times. So you kind of know where they were. You should know where they were. The teacher should be giving you that data. And that's another thing too, is when you look at those progress reports that you're getting from your child's teacher, when it's the special ed progress report, the IEP progress report, sometimes it's simply clicked like progress being made. If that's what's happening, I would be asking, what does that look like? What is that data? So if our baseline starting at the school year was 3 letters, come first quarter, we're up to 9, then I want to see that. I want to know that. That should be on the progress report. If you get one that just has the little box checked because that's easy, ask for it. Because really, if they don't have it, then they're not going to have the data at the time for ESY. So you might as well ask for it, see where they're at. If you're really getting pushback, then, if you want to do some informal, let's see where they're at. I mean, what's on the IEP, see what they're able to do at home. Now, what does need to be, taken into consideration is home and school. So your child comes home, it's summertime, and you see regressions, then that's at home. So, it does walk a fine line, and it can be very difficult to differentiate because oftentimes we hear bell to bell, because a parent's like, well, at home, this and this and this is happening. And the school's like, well, I don't see that, or vice versa, And so a family might be on here this evening. I had a meeting today, and the school's like, well, what are you guys doing at home? And I go, well, I'm so sorry. This particular situation, it's not happening at home. It's only happening at school. So what are you doing to help this child during the bell to bell time? This isn't, it's not meant to be a blame game. It's not meant to be, it really needs to be a team coming together to make these decisions for each child. But what you see at home may not be what the school sees. So we do have to at least take that into consideration. And also what your child can do at home with you in the comfort of their home in a food secure environment with people that they trust is very likely going to be different than what they see at school when, hopefully it's a food secure environment. Hopefully they have somebody who is with them that they trust and can have, some less anxiety around. But with that being said, if you start seeing drops at home, we have to make sure that it's, correlating. So you can't just have your own data of how much time maybe your child is in dysregulation at home and expect the school then to be like, oh, your data is showing that. They also need to see it.
Yes. We have a question in the chat that says, will a different evaluation be conducted for ESY, or would ESY just follow the original IEP?
So because it is just an extension, it should be part of the IEP from the beginning, but again, it might be deferred. So that's one of those examples where personally, the school has a year's worth of data by the time they come to that annual review. However, new year, new team, they might want to have the data from that school year. So if your child's IEP meeting is in August and you just started school, other than having from the end of last year to this year, and you're writing a new IEP with new goals, then you don't know their progress on those goals. You have an idea of if they were making the progress and maintaining it or regressing and how long it took to recoup those skills. You should have an idea. But if the team is wanting to focus on these IEP goals, because those are the goals that if you're doing it in August, that goes to August, then that IEP team may ask that it be deferred, and you'll come back when they either have the data. So that, I mean, they could just do it in fall and say, we already have enough data to make that decision. They might want to wait until after spring break, which is why right now a lot of meetings are happening. There is no separate evaluation per se. It's not that there's an assessment that can be given to every child to determine if they meet eligibility for ESY. With that being said, the IEP is your evaluation for ESY. So the goals are already on there. Where they're at is already known or should be known, right? You start the IEP, a brand new IEP with baseline data, and then you're documenting along the way. And then you're going to have those lines. And if they want to graph it, great. Then we should have some change lines after a break. When were they gone? If your child, has to have surgery, a lot of times children with PWS are having different back surgeries to their spinal area, then, that's another break, and what does that look like? So, if your child's going to be gone for a long period of time, also look into hospital homebound, but then that might be able to be another time that you can collect that data and have some of that. So I hope that answers it. It's not like a one fits all, but the evaluation, check your child's progress, and that should be what you guys are reviewing. And that should be being reviewed anyways if you're in an IEP meeting.
Mm-hmm. What is your take on if a school suggests or the team comes together and says that, the student really does need ASY, but as a family, you decide you really want to have the break. Perhaps it's an opportunity to get some private therapy that you feel might be more beneficial. How does a family handle that situation? And some of what I have heard from families is fear of retaliation from the school should
Sure.
they choose to not take the ESY.
Absolutely. I think, every family has to do what's right for their family, and parents know their children better than anybody. So if the team is saying, we think that your child needs ESY and you don't, that can be as simple as, thank you, but we're going to go a different route. If you feel the need to explain, which is okay. I mean, I understand they're like telling you your child needs services and you're going, no, I don't want them. We all know that, for families of children, just everything that I said at the end, especially for children with PWS and children on the autism spectrum, which obviously we do have a lot of families that have both, then that can be very difficult. And other than you, the teachers that are in that classroom every single day know how difficult that change can be. And so, they feel that is their responsibility is to offer it to you if your child meets the eligibility. And that's where either you can say yes, you can say no, or that might be where you kind of say, I agree that, speech, we really need, we don't have one right now, or you do, and you just want to continue it, that maybe you just go in for that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that way, you can kind of do a little bit of both without, it's that the anxiety that comes around all of these changes. And sometimes it's just for a short period of time. And then you do have to weigh, what is best for you, your family, and for your child. I don't think schools in general look negative upon it, given that you are doing it for the right reason. It's obviously, if you're worried about it, you're probably not doing it because you're lazy. You're doing it because your child's going to a special camp or your family goes on this trip every year. Now, also remember, if you do take trips during ESY, you can do the other time with ESY and then go on vacation. This is not you must be there every single day or you're going to be kicked out. So, depending on a lot of schools, depending on when you get out, usually it's the month of June, because July you have a holiday and then a lot of people are starting to prep again for school, depending on where you're at, that, you might want to go for 2 weeks and then you don't go for the other 2 weeks, or your child has camp for 1 week and, they're offering it for 4 or 5 weeks. So, again, I don't believe anything is a one size fits all, especially with our kiddos. So, that is truly having that team there to decide and find out what might work best. And if it's ESY, great. And if it's not, that's okay too.
I love that you said you could do part of it and not necessarily all of it, because I do think that some families get presented as it's an all or nothing, and it is very cookie cutter, rather than, we can customize this. We should be customizing this.
Yes. And I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, it's, school districts are attempting to provide this service to a lot of kids. And so they do tend to have a model that does, try to mirror school. So it's almost the whole day. It's most days of the week. And that's great for a lot of kids, especially if they need that level of support. But if, your child is just not needing that level, then yeah, it really needs to be considered that it's not this or that. And then I think, sorry, something just popped up and I need to close that. It distracts me when it pops up in front of me. I'm like, oh my goodness. So I think that keeping that in mind, now I will say that some districts, their funding does depend sometimes on attendance within that first window. So being understanding or flexible of what that looks like of, okay, you're not going to come until the last 2 weeks. The school doesn't get funding if the child is not there on day 1 or day 3. Usually that's kind of around there. Then sometimes that is having a discussion with your administration of, we are planning on coming. We will be here this time, rather than just not going those first 2 weeks, because then when you do come, then there may not be the staff. And that's the other part. I mean, the funding is funding the staff that's in there. So if they are only planning on 5 kids coming, then they may not have as many additional adult supports. But if your child requires a one-on-one and your child's coming and they show up on week 3, so I just say, keep that communication open and just be honest with them about what your intentions are, so that they can make sure they have what they need to support your child.
We have one more question here. So what would be your take on offering ESY, specifically speech, virtually for our kiddos?
I've seen it. Obviously, COVID, although awful, taught us a lot. I mean, I'm sitting here, right? So who would have thought that we could be doing this, all of this, and a lot of it came out of the COVID time. So obviously therapies had to go virtual during COVID, or they were stopped. I think that it really depends on your child. So I've had in some meetings where even for a child that's going to be maybe homebound for a while, maybe after a surgery, and the therapist is like, I do not think I could provide the therapy virtually, or I don't know if the child would be receptive to it virtually, then that needs to be discussed. However, there are children that if you are traveling or your kid is going to need, to be somewhere, or you guys are going to be doing different activities, where that could work. Again, I think, we've all discussed how virtual learning is good for some and not good for others. So, if your child is able to do that and it is at the point where they can, communicate, but speech can be difficult if they're trying to look at and or manipulate anything. The computer doesn't really give you that opportunity. And then you're, as the parent or whomever is maybe with your child during that time, is going to be somewhat responsible for trying to help with that or reiterate what was said, because also we know on the computer, if there's any the speech differences can be difficult to understand if you're trying to have a child practice a sound and you're not getting it through the computer. I am not opposed to anything, and I would support it if it works for the child. Now, that being said, if the school says we only offer it this way, I'm not okay with that. So, if it's we only are offering it virtually right now, if the data doesn't show that your child makes that progress online, or can maintain attention to a computer for 30 minutes with a speech therapist without having breaks and doing some interactive play, then that's not the right thing. And that's when we have that, we need to break that cookie cutter.
It's actually a great point. I think of a specific IEP meeting that I was in, and they were having a lot of trouble finding therapists, as many districts are right now. So what they offered was virtual, but it was very clear, this is the only thing that we are offering because we have no one to do
And
that.
that is really, it's very prevalent right now.
Yeah.
You know, just the shortage in teachers, especially in special ed teachers and paraprofessionals. I mean, I can almost guarantee every family on here right now has had some struggles with having, you know, the adult support, whether it's a one-on-one or a 3-to-1, just maintaining a ratio right now. There's just not people. And speech therapists are one of them that is definitely up there of struggling. So, I mean, there will come a time if that is happening and they just don't have it. And some districts are contracting out.
Yeah.
So if a district can't find, you know, a specific level or a specific therapist, and it actually happens a lot in very small districts anyways, that they may contract with, you know, some sort of outside agency or even you know, a private therapy, you know, location, and they can bring someone in that can work with them, but it's not, they're not employed by the district, but they contract with them. A lot of districts have started needing to go to that just to fill some of these positions,
Yes.
which is obviously heartbreaking and difficult for, you know, families, especially if that person may not be around always, or, you know, if you're a contract, it's not the same as being an employee that, you know, is more
Mhm.
likely to stay around for a while. That gets difficult. And then obviously add that on top of, that's just not going to be easy for any child with Prader-Willi to have somebody coming and going and in and out. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I saw Charles pop up again, that something about the having virtual only. And I'm going to guess that maybe where they're at, and Charles, we can talk about that later, of seeing what is available. That definitely can be difficult. And especially for very young, Charles, for very young, that's very hard to do virtually. I can only imagine.
Yeah. And I am seeing it a lot with those younger families, and it is. And what we're finding, or at least what I'm observing, is the data is not really supporting the progress. And then you're back at the table saying, okay, now this isn't working. We need to do something different.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it's
Still isn't there.
definitely can be a double-edged sword depending on each child and where they're at. And also age, like I said, you know, I think,
Yes.
you know, the younger ones, they need so much interaction during some of these therapies to maintain focus. And then, but, you know, trying to do that virtually, then it's going to fall back on whomever's at home, right? And obviously, typically that's going to be a parent that's having to also parent
Mhm.
and now somehow support a therapist in working through a computer screen.
Yep. In the case of the student I was thinking of, they ended up contracting with that child's private speech therapist to be able to get him the therapy that he needs. But I do know that that's not always, it could be an uphill battle with some
Definitely.
to,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, right now I see a lot with the speech area, but also in the behavior area of, you know, whether it's some level of a tech or somebody who actually has training in it. You know, a lot of districts will train their own,
Mhm.
but what does that really look like? You know, it's hard because the level of what is needed can differ, you know, across the country. So, you know, just having the label of a behavior specialist does not really mean that either you have a background in that or have had any additional training. So, you know, sometimes filling a position can also be harmful when you're just filling it to just fill it.
Right. Yes, and I think we've seen that in all sorts of different
Absolutely.
areas, not just school districts, but
Absolutely. Yeah.
everywhere. Oh, Charles, that's awful. They're on their fourth speech therapist, and it's such an early start in your school career. That's a lot of change, which again is difficult for our kids. But thank you I know we're just about out of time. Thank you so much for doing this.